Clara Hayes stepped into the towering lobby, her heels echoing softly against polished marble. She had a folder in hand, mind sharp, ready to present her innovative proposal, when Victor Lang, the CEO, spotted her from across the room. His gaze hardened, and before anyone could intervene, he spoke loud enough for the gathering staff to hear. "You don't belong here." Gasps rippled through the room. Clara froze, a flicker of shock in her eyes, but her posture remained perfect. Shoulders squared, lips pressed into a calm line. What would you do if someone stripped your worth in front of everyone? Assuming you had nothing. The air thickened with tension, the fluorescent lights reflecting off glass panels as whispers grew louder. Then, just as quickly, Clara turned slightly, and a faint glimmer of steel flashed in her hazel eyes. A low hum seemed to vibrate through the lobby, as if the building itself knew her truth. Clara moved to the edge of the lobby, exhaling quietly, masking a storm of thoughts. Her mind raced through every insult, every sneer, yet her exterior remained immaculate. She scanned the crowd, noting sympathetic glances from a few staff, the subtle tension that made the air almost tangible. The hum of air conditioning, footsteps, and murmurs blended into a backdrop of uncertainty. How do you respond when someone in power assumes you are nothing, yet you hold the quiet truth they cannot see? Whispers rippled across the staff, some faces pale, some curious, others unsure how to react. Clara's silence amplified the weight of Victor's words, each syllable echoing like a challenge. Her calm defiance unsettled him, but he masked it with an overconfident laugh. The lobby seemed to contract, attention narrowing like a lens on this singular confrontation. Victor smirked, confident in his dominance, unaware of the undercurrents swirling around him. Clara's lips curved in the faintest hint of a knowing smile as she quietly pivoted, stepping away from the crowd. The click of her heels was almost musical, drawing attention despite her intent to remain unobtrusive. Every eye followed, some with suspicion, some with awe, as the quiet tension thickened. Clara paused near the lobby's entrance to the elevators, eyes scanning the architecture, the glass panels, the polished steel, the towering ceilings. A secret smile flickered. This building, this very space, held a truth few could imagine. The irony pressed against her ribs like a heartbeat. She stepped forward, ready for the next move, carrying with her the quiet certainty that power is not always where it appears to be. In a quiet corner office, far above the lobby's chaos, Clara placed her folder on the mahogany desk. The city lights shimmered through the floor-to-ceiling glass, casting reflections across her focused face. She scrolled through her tablet, reviewing contracts, transfers, and silent partnerships, the web of ownership Victor would never suspect. Her reflection merged with the skyline, a woman shaped by storms, now standing at the edge of her own revelation. The memory of his words still echoed, but now they carried no sting, only fuel. The night deepened, and Clara's mind slipped to the past, a memory of long meetings, rejections, and the quiet signing of documents that slowly turned the odds in her favor. She remembered shaking hands with unseen investors, the slow rise from silence to influence. Every deal, every signature had led to this quiet empire, invisible to those too proud to look closely. Meanwhile, Victor sat in his glossy conference room surrounded by projections of future profits. His voice filled the space, booming with arrogance, certain of his control. "We'll expand," he declared, tapping his pen, unaware that his future sat in Clara's hands. Confidence dripped from every word, the kind that blinds a man to the ground beneath his feet. Clara's voice was calm as she made a discreet call. "Prepare everything," she said softly. Her tone held the kind of certainty that left no room for doubt. In that moment, her reflection in the glass seemed to nod back at her, as if the building itself approved. Power, she realized, didn't need volume. It only needed truth, revealed at the right time. Down in the main office, whispers began. Elena Morales, a young staff member who had witnessed the lobby scene, leaned toward a coworker. "She didn't seem scared," she said. There was something about Clara's poise that unsettled everyone. Not fear, but curiosity. A sense that something bigger was about to unfold, and none of them could guess what. Morning sunlight spilled across the office floors as Clara walked through the main corridor. Conversations stilled. Papers froze midair. Her footsteps were steady, echoing softly like a quiet warning. Victor's booming voice carried from the boardroom, filled with self-assurance, oblivious to what was coming. Clara didn't rush. Each step was deliberate, each breath aligned with purpose. She wasn't entering as a guest anymore. She was coming home. Inside the boardroom, Victor leaned back in his chair, laughter spilling out as he charmed investors with stories of his leadership. Yet, beneath the confidence, a flicker of irritation sparked when he caught a whisper about the woman he had dismissed. Irrelevant, he muttered, waving it off. He didn't know that irrelevance was about to walk through his door and rewrite his fate. The door opened without a knock. Clara stepped in, the sound of her heels slicing through the chatter. For a heartbeat, silence swallowed the room. Victor straightened, mask of authority faltering. Hayes. This is a closed meeting, he said sharply. She placed a folder on the table, her tone calm but edged with quiet power. I know. It's time we talked about ownership. Gasps broke through the room as Clara flipped open the folder. Legal documents spread before them. Ownership certificates, signatures, seals. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. The truth spoke louder than arrogance ever could. Victor's face strained of color, the realization crawling over him slowly. The empire he thought he ruled had always belonged to her. For a long moment, no one spoke. The hum of the city below filled the silence. Clara lifted her gaze to Victor. You told me I didn't belong here, she said softly, but I own this place. The words landed like thunder, muffled by calm. The power shift was complete, elegant, undeniable, irreversible. Victor's lips parted, but no sound came. Only the faint sound of Clara's heels as she turned and walked out, leaving him in the echo of his own downfall. The next day, Victor's usual bravado had vanished. The boardroom felt different, colder, quieter. He glanced at the papers Clara had left behind, now sitting untouched in front of him. He tried to recover. This is a misunderstanding, he muttered, but his voice lacked conviction. He raised a trembling hand to his head, scanning the documents again, hoping for a loophole that didn't exist. The building he thought was his. The company he thought was his. It was hers. The walls seemed to close in on him. Clara had been quiet since the confrontation, but she had already set things in motion. She didn't need to say anything further. Her legal team was already in action, her allies in the company moving pieces into place. In her office, Clara calmly made another call. Secure the next phase, she said, her voice still smooth but full of determination. We'll take full control by the end of the week. As the line went dead, she took a slow breath, a faint smile tugging at her lips. Her rise had always been a quiet one, but it was unstoppable now. As Victor scrambled for answers, Clara walked through the main office, her every step echoing in the quiet corridors. The staff who had once been intimidated by Victor now watched her with growing respect. She didn't need to demand loyalty. She commanded it by simply existing. At the elevator, she exchanged a nod with Elena Morales, whose wide eyes spoke volumes. There was no more fear, only the calm, unshakable assurance that Clara had taken the lead. Victor's panic reached a new height as he stormed into Clara's office later that day, his fists clenched. "You can't do this," he snarled, his voice raw with desperation. "I built this company." Clara didn't look up from her desk. "No," she said softly. "You used this company. I built it." The silence that followed was thick with the weight of truth, but Clara's voice was the one that filled the room, calm and unwavering. Victor stood there for a long moment, his chest heaving, his mind racing for a comeback. But the words wouldn't come. He couldn't outpace her, and he knew it. Slowly, he turned, retreating from her office as the door clicked shut behind him. Clara remained seated, a calm smile playing on her lips as she looked out over the city. This was just the beginning. Her vision would shape the future. There was nothing left to prove. Victor's desperation reached its peak as he tried to manipulate the company's security systems. He accessed old backdoor files, changed passwords, and tried to lock down vital information. But Clara had been 2 steps ahead. Her team had already encrypted everything, and the systems Victor was tampering with were already set to fail. What he didn't realize was that his actions were only accelerating his downfall. As the screens in front of him flickered, Clara's voice echoed in his mind. "You used this company. I built it. And now, every attempt to control it only proved her point." Back in her own office, Clara sat calmly, reviewing the final steps of her plan. She knew the next move would be decisive. As she clicked the send button on an encrypted email to the board members, her eyes drifted to the skyline again. The building, her empire, stood firm in the city's heart, its reflection as solid as the foundation she'd built over the years. She wasn't just taking back control. She was reshaping the future, and nothing would stop her. Victor stormed into the boardroom, his eyes wild. He had tried everything: legal threats, calls to external allies. But the board was no longer listening. Their loyalty had shifted, and they were now aligned with Clara. When he demanded a meeting to contest her, the response was immediate and direct. "The vote is over, Victor. It's done." The words hung in the air, bitter and final. He staggered back, the reality sinking in. Clara arrived at the boardroom, and the room stilled once again. She didn't need to say anything. The board members knew who had truly won. Victor stood at the far end of the table, his face pale, as Clara walked confidently toward the head of the table. The silence that followed was deafening. She took her seat, slow and deliberate, and with one quiet nod, the vote was finalized. Victor Lang, the man who had once ruled this place, was out. The vote was announced, and it was unanimous. Clara stood up, her gaze lingering for a moment on the board members, who now viewed her with a mixture of respect and awe. As the meeting concluded, Victor stood in the back of the room alone. The doors clicked shut behind him. Clara turned toward the window, watching the sunset cast a warm glow over the city. Her victory was not loud nor dramatic. It was measured, inevitable, and completely hers. The day after the boardroom vote, Clara walked through the office floor with a quiet confidence that had transformed the atmosphere. Staff, who had once whispered behind her back, now approached her with respect, some offering smiles, others nodding in acknowledgement. The oppressive tension that had once filled the space under Victor's reign was gone. Clara's vision, though still unfolding, was now being embraced by those who had quietly waited for change. She didn't have to speak a word. Her presence alone commanded the awe. Later that day, Clara stood in the glass-walled conference room, looking down at the city below. She could feel the weight of the responsibility settling on her shoulders, but it wasn't a burden. It was a purpose. Her team was already working on the next phase: expansion, innovation, and rebuilding what had been tarnished. Her hand rested lightly on the smooth surface of the conference table, and for the first time in a long while, she allowed herself to think about the future. A future she was finally steering in the right direction. Clara gathered her team in the same boardroom where Victor had once stood. They sat around the polished table, eager to hear what was next. Clara didn't give long speeches or grandiose promises. Instead, she shared her vision plainly, focusing on the values she wanted the company to uphold: innovation, integrity, and respect for every individual. She looked around at the faces of her colleagues, many of whom had been sidelined under Victor's rule. "We build this together," she said. "Each one of you has a part in this." The weeks that followed were a blur of strategic meetings and restructuring. Clara's leadership was never about dominating others. It was about empowering them. As she met with key partners and visited various departments, she could feel the momentum building. She no longer needed to prove herself to anyone. The work spoke for itself. The company, once filled with suspicion and division, was slowly transforming into something greater, with Clara at the helm, calm and steady, guiding them all forward. One afternoon, Clara sat alone in her office, watching the sun dip below the skyline. The weight of the building's ownership still felt surreal at times, but the reality of her success was no longer something she questioned. The world around her had changed, not through force or grand gestures, but through quiet persistence and undeniable strength. She'd had fought for every step of this journey, and now she was exactly where she needed to be. As the days grew shorter and the office buzzed with the energy of a company reborn, Clara found herself alone again in the quiet of her office, overlooking the city that had watched her rise. She reflected on the past. The years spent building her network, the sacrifices made, the moments when she had been underestimated. The journey had been long, and at times it had seemed insurmountable. Yet, here she stood, her vision realized, her resolve unshaken. She had turned what was meant to be a humiliation into a defining moment. She had learned that power wasn't about domination, but about knowing who you were and what you stood for. The sound of footsteps broke her thoughts. Elena, the young staff member who had witnessed the early moments of Clara's rise, stood at the door, hesitating. Clara turned her gaze, meeting Elena's eyes. "How are we doing?" Clara asked, her voice warm but authoritative. Elena smiled, her eyes bright with admiration. "We're doing great, Clara. You've changed everything." Clara smiled back, a quiet understanding passing between them. She didn't need accolades, but this moment, this shared recognition, meant more than any corporate victory ever could. Later that week, Clara stood on the balcony of the building, looking out at the city she had once only dreamed of changing. She thought about Victor, about all the people who had doubted her, and about the quiet strength that had carried her through it all. She had always known the truth, that power isn't about making others fear you, but about earning respect through your actions. Now, the city below her was not a symbol of victory over others, but a testament to the power of quiet resilience. As Clara returned to her office that evening, she sat down at her desk one last time for the day. She opened a drawer and pulled out a small, worn photograph. A picture of herself and a few of her early business mentors, long before she had become the woman who now ran the company. She studied the image for a long time, her fingers lightly tracing the edges. In that moment, she saw not just the girl she had been, but the woman she had become. The journey had been long, and the road ahead would still be challenging. But Clara knew now that no matter what happened, she was ready for whatever came next. The building below her, once a place of her own quiet ambition, now stood as a symbol of everything she had overcome. The people she worked with were no longer just employees. They were partners in something far greater than the sum of its parts. Clara's thoughts were interrupted by the soft chime of an email notification. She glanced at the screen, her hand poised to reply, but then paused. She had made her mark, and now it was time for the world to see where her vision could take them next.